This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chaf Aleph, book 21, the Sicha of Tisa, the first Sicha. In the pasuk where it says that when they came into the Oyel Moyed, when they came into the tent of meeting, Yir Chatzu Mayim V'lo Yomu, so they should wash with water and they shouldn't die. Oy V'gish Tom Ala Mizbeach L'Shodeis L'Haktir Ishal Hashem, and when they come close to the Mizbeach to serve, they should bring up an offering to Hashem. And then the pasuk continues that Aaron, they shall wash their hands and feet, and they shouldn't die. So the pasuk speaks about two distinct things. When they come into the El Moed, they have to wash their hands, or when they come close to the Mizbeach to offer up and to serve the Shodes, to offer up an offering to Hashem, then they have to wash their hands and not die. So Rashi comments on the words when they come to the El Moed, and he explains lahaktir shachris uvein ha'arbayim ketores, to offer up a morning and afternoon the ketores, or lahazis midam par kohen hamashiach osiri avodah zarah, or to sprinkle from the blood of the bull that's offered by the kohen who's anointed by the oil, usiire avodah zarah, and the he goats that are brought up as an atonement for avodah zarah. So, just quickly to comment, we said lahaktir shachris ubein arbaim ketores, to offer up in the morning and afternoon the ketores. It's a little bit of an awkward lashon. In order too, the Rebbe says that there's other nuschas, and later on, towards the end of the sikha, the Rebbe will explain that we can, according to the Rebbe's explanation, understand why this language, which is a little bit different than usual, will be explained. So first of all, we have to understand, Rashi jumps into comment on something that seems to be a simple pasuk. When you come to the oil maid, you have to wash your hands. What's difficult to understand in this pasuk that Rashi has to come and forewarn and answer with a pirush? So the Mefarshim learn that Rashi comes to forewarn, you shouldn't think that coming into the Oyel Moed. Let me point out here that Pasuk speaks about two things, right? Coming to the Oyel Moed, the tent of meeting, they should wash their hands and not die. Or when they come to the Mizbeach to offer up a sacrifice to Hashem. The Mizbeach was in the courtyard of the Mishkan. It was Mizbeach Hachitzoy, the outside Mizbeach for animals. Going into the Oyel Moed meant going into the actual tent. So that's where there was a Mizbeach, but that's where the Mizbeach HaZohav was, the golden Mizbeach, which is also known as the Mizbeach HaKetoros. Okay? So Rashi here explained, when you go into the Oyel Moed, what are you going to the Oyel Moed for? To kindle the Ketoros. Why does Rashi have to comment that? So Farshim say that Rashi comes to answer, we shouldn't think that going into the Oyel Moed, even for what's called Biarei Konis, an empty going in other words, a going in without purpose, that if you enter without washing your hands and feet, you violated. You shouldn't think that way, says Rashi. Now, and therefore he says, when you go in to offer up the ketores or something like that, then you violated. Now, why does Rashi have to tell us? Why would I think that just going in for no purpose would already earn you a violation? Because it would be mashma from what the pasuk says in a unequivocal language. The pasuk says b'vayam, just simply when they come to the El Moed, they have to wash their hands and not die. Not like what it says a few words later about the Mizbeach. It says, or when they go to the Mizbeach l'shores to serve. From this, it seems imperative to say that the actual coming into the Oyel Moed, even if it's not to serve, requires washing hands and feet. So it seems the pasuk is saying two things. If you come into the Oyel Moed for any purpose, you go into the actual tent, actual heichal, you have to wash your hands. You're coming into the outside courtyard to the Mizbeach. If you're coming to serve and you didn't wash your hands, then you're punishable. You violated a Isur Misa. Rashi says, in order not to think that way, Rashi says that when coming into the Oyel Moed also means in order to offer something, I'm not just coming in for no reason. When is there a chiyuv misa, a liability of death penalty? is only when a service is done without washing hands and feet, not if you just came in. That's what some of would say. That's why Rashi qualifies that. What does it mean to come into the Oyel Moed and violate a prohibition of if you came in to serve, not just if you came in. But that's Pirush requires a lot of Ian Tzarich Ian Gadol, requires a lot of a lot of it requires thought. We have questions on it. First of all, according to this, now we ask the other way. How does Takan, if you're saying that Rashi is establishing that for going in for no reason there's no violation, how does Rashi know that according to Pshutei Shemikra, according to the simple reading of the Pasuk? How does he know that you're not Chayav Misa for going in for no reason? In the Pasuk, it seems the exact opposite. The Pasuk seems to tell us that just for going in, even if it's for no reason, you've done a violation. Now, if you want to say that Al Pi Halacha, in other words, the Rebbe says, my question about this concept is Pshutei Shel Mikra question, because in Halacha we could say a thought that the pasuk is really, while it's divided, but there's a word at the end, l'shares, to serve, which goes on the entire pasuk. So in other words, the pasuk would read, when they come into the Oyel Maid, skip the next few words, which is Yirchatz umayim v'lo, so they have to wash their hands and not die. Put that in brackets and continue to the next part of the pasuk. Or when they come to the mizbeach to serve. So read that the to serve goes on both components. When they come to the Oyel Maid, or they come to the mizbeach to serve. To serve is going also when they come to the Oyel Maid. That's when you're obligated. So we could learn that from the pasuk. But besides the fact, if that's what Rashi is telling us, and that's what Rashi's proof is, Rashi should have quoted in his Dibur Hamaschil, Rashi should have quoted from the Torah the word L'shares, because that would be the whole proof. Rashi doesn't bring the word L'shares, he doesn't even say etc. when he brings the words when they come into the Oyel Moed, etc. Should have said, because that etc. would have included the word L'shares later in the pasuk to serve, and that would be the basis of what Rashi is saying, that when are you liable for the prohibition of coming in unwashed hands if you came in L'shares, you came in to serve, not just if you went in. But Rashi doesn't say that. Also, in Pshutei Shel Mikra, when we read the simple understanding of the pasuk, it doesn't make it doesn't fit to say that the word L'shares to serve goes also on the first part of the pasuk, going into the Oyel Moed to serve. Well, then, simply speaking, the pasuk should have been written differently in Pshutei Shel Mikra. So they said when they come into the Oyel Moed or they come close to the mizbeach to serve, and then the to serve would go on both of those things, then they should wash their hands and not die. But since it doesn't say it that way, it says when they come to the Oyel Moed, they should wash their hands and not die, and then it says the next component of the pasuk, or there's a word or, separate thing, or when they come to the mizbeach to serve, they have to wash their hands and not die. You see, it's two components, and the first one doesn't speak anything about serving. So from Pshutei Shel Mikra, it would seem that there's no requirement to serve to be in violation of the prohibition of coming in with unwashed hands. So where does Rashi get it to say that you are only in violation when you come in to offer up the keteiros? Two, if Rashi wants to forewarn this point, that when the pasuk says when you go into the Oyel Moed, and Rashi wants to say it doesn't mean if you go in for no reason, it's only if you go in like to bring the keteiros, for example. He should have done that earlier. When earlier? There's another pasuk which says generically when they come to the Oyel Moed, no, not about not coming in with unwashed hands, but about the clothing of the kohen. It says in Parshas Tetzaveh, which we read one portion before this parsha, that the clothes of the kahuna, vaho you al Aaron goimer, they shall be on Aaron when he comes in, on Aaron and his sons when they come in to serve in the Mishkan. There also the pasuk has two stanzas. Pasuk has two parts when they come to the Oyel Moed, or when they come close to the Mizbeach to serve in holiness. So in those two components, Rashi should have said that coming into the Oyel Moed means on behalf of offering something up when he does an Aveda. And it doesn't mean just coming in for no reason, but Rashi doesn't comment that. In other words, Rashi, it seems that Rashi understands that when B'vayam el Oyel Moed would mean It would seem then that Rashi understands that those words coming into the Olam Moed, we understand it means in order to serve. He says the Rebbe here in the square brackets. You could say this pasuk is different. The pasuk about the clothing, the kohen not to come in without not having his clothes, his special kohen clothes, is different because there the pasuk doesn't have any interruption between the two parts. It says when you come into the oil made, or when you go to the mizbeach to serve, one runs after the other. So it's so simple that that the words after when you come to the Mizbeach to serve in holiness go on also the part that says when you come into the El Moyed. So there's no need for Rashi to even explain that obviously it's when you come into the El Moyed to serve, or when you go to the Mizbeach to serve that says right after the Mizbeach is going on both parts. It's a deichik to say that Rashi considers it so simple he doesn't need to say anything, And here he says here he does say something, but he doesn't seem to base it on the fact that the pasuk says l'shores after the second stanza. So it's difficult. Why is Rashi jumping in? And not just why is Rashi commenting? Rashi is saying something that you're only liable if you come in for a purpose, whereas the simple reading of the pasuk would seem to be that you are liable if you come in for no reason. Where does Rashi get to say that only for a purpose you're a violation? Base. More than that, you can't at all say that Rashi's purpose here is to negate what one may think that when the pasuk says when you come to the tent of meeting, you are in violation. So you shall not think that it means coming in for no reason. You can't say that Rashi comes to negate an entry for no reason because in the way of pshat, it's a very big chiddush to say that there is a concept of going in for no reason to the Oil Maid, which is the actual opposite of the way matters took place in reality and the way the perception of a child is about the reality of the Mishkan. A 5-year-old who's learning Chumash knows that the Oyel Moyed, as it's called, is a tent of meeting. It's the holiest place. You don't just go in there for taking a walk or something. It's as his name is, an Oyel, a tent, which is a Moyed, which is a place of appointment, of meeting. You go there when Hashem says to go there. When Hashem tells you to go there and with some purpose to do what He wants, to do the work, that's when you go in there. And al pi halacha, there is a prohibition to go into the heichal in a way that it's for no reason, and that's why Mefarshim learn. And Rashi is not coming to negate here that when you go in to the oyel moyed stamazay just for no reason, you need to wash your hands. No, it's when you go into the oyel moyed for the reason of lishtachava, is to bow down, to prostrate yourself before Hashem. Oh, in the halachic world, there is a concept of going in just to bow down, right? So, so that's why the Mefarshim that learned that why Rashi says when you go in, um, you're in violation. What kind of a going in is it negating? When you go in order to bring up keteris, then you violated that law. Rashi is telling us that it's not if you go in to bow, but that's not a pshutei shel mikra concept. Because according to Pshat, it doesn't make sense to say that there's permission granted to go into the Oyhel Moyed in order to bow. Because there's no instruction about bowing. You don't find it in the Torah. And there's also no need to go into the Oyel Moed, into the inner sanctum, to bow before Hashem. You could do that also in the Chotzer HaMishkan, in the place where the Karbanis would go, in the place where the outer altar is. You don't have to go dafka into the Oyel Moed. I'll be pshat. So therefore, why is somebody going into the Oyel Moed in the 5-year-old's mind is to do an avodah? So you understand that the pasuk when it says when you go into the Oyel Moed, they should wash their hands. Without Rashi saying anything, we would understand it means to go when you go in for the purpose that you're meant to go in. When you're going to do an avodah. So why then does Rashi have to comment anything on it? Right? So we said, why does Rashi have to comment anything? And if Rashi is saying, don't, just telling us that you're not in violation. If you go in stamazay, there's no concept. Why would there is no concept of stam going in? You say going into bow. There's al no concept of going into bow. If it says you're in violation when you come to the oil mode, you have to wash your hands. Everyone understands why you come to the oil mode to do aveda. Why does Rashi have to add that? Gimel. So we'll understand this by first understanding a question in the language of Rashi. We're going to get to the answer through being medayik in the language of Rashi. If Rashi only wants to emphasize that the pirush of when you come into the oil moed means when you're coming in to do something, an avodah that needs to be done inside, so he should have said it in shorter, concise language. Could have added one word. Could have quoted from the pasuk, the heading when they come into the oil moed. Just added one word, l'shares, to serve. Why does Rashi explain what kind of service is done there? To offer up the ketores or to sprinkle the blood that needs to be done in the oil moed, not on the outer mizbeach? This is not the place where Rashi has to start giving information about which things are done specifically inside the oil moed. Even if Rashi wants to bring some kind of an example, it's not understood why he brings these examples. Why ketores and why the blood of the Kohen Mashiach? Why not other kinds of service like setting up the lechem upon him, the face bread, or the preparing and lighting of the menorah? That's also in the heichal. The shulchan is in is in the actual oil moed. So is the menorah, and especially those details about the Mishkan are spoken about much earlier than the Ketores. The Ketores is only spoken about the end of Parshas Tetzaveh. All those other items are spoken about already in Parshas Truma. Base, more than that, the examples of Lahazis Midam Parkein Mashiach, the sprinkling of the blood that takes place inside the Elmoed from the offering of the Kohen Mashiach, the anointed Kohen, or the Sira Avedizara, the he goats that are brought for violation of idolatry. So those bloods are sprinkled inside. We didn't learn about this yet. Only later on we're going to learn about in Parshas Vayikra. That's for the offering of the Kohen Mashiach, and for the par, and for the soyer, for the goat of offering, for Avodah Zarah. We are going to learn about it in the book of Bamidbar, in the portion of Shlach. So why does Rashi speak about it in our pasuk, which is a chiddush for the Ben Chavash Mikra, that there's these kinds of services, and then to say that this is what the pasuk means here, where the pasuk hasn't yet spoken about these concepts. The third question, by the first example Rashi brings, he also adds details to offer up morning and evening the incense. He doesn't just say simply to offer up the incense. Come on, we know when that is. This is not the place to tell us how many times a day you have to offer up the ketores. Especially, we just learned last parsha, the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, that the ketores is brought up twice every day. And if Rashi would have just said stam lahak the ketores, to offer up the ketores, we would already know that the ketores are brought shachris and ben arbaim, morning and evening and afternoon. So from all of these, the UK halishanes, from all of these nuances in the language of Rashi, it's imperative to say there's something taking place here below the surface that we didn't see till now. But really, what Rashi is trying to tell us, not that when you go into the oil mode you need to wash your hands. This means only when you go in to serve. And then Rashi gives examples about the service. No, but Rashi is telling us that the law about going into the oil mode and the need to wash your hands, Rashi is not giving us. One second. As Kabbalas Rashi is nicht so mag sein, als beweim al moed meint die Knis al Sholes. Und dem geht das nur eine Weise von dem, nur als der dem von beweim al moed so mal is dafka bei die Avede is beweim al moed, also dann fragen, was Avede soll. Rashi is trying to give us examples of when a person would be going to the oil moed. It's not to tell us that it's not to tell us that when you do service in the oil moed you need to wash your hands. It's to tell us when you come into the oil moed, coming in, and he explains when would be the coming in take place. When you come in, you have to wash. We didn't flesh this out yet. Let's explain now in Dalit. The explanation this is. The question in the pasuk that Rashi comes to answer is, why does the Torah say two stanzas here? When you come into the oil moed, or when you come close to the Mizbeach to serve. And the punishment, the instruction, and the warning, and do not die, is also said twice. So it says, when you come into the Oil Moed, wash your hands and don't die. Or when you come close to Mizbeach to offer up, you should wash your hands and feet and not die. It says it twice. It says two separate, distinct instructions here. Why is it said distinctly like that? So the pasuk should have joined them together, just like we earlier quoted a pasuk about the instruction, the need to wear the clothing of the kohanim when they went in. There, the pasuk does merge the two concepts together. It says it should be on Aaron and his sons when they come into the tent of meeting, or when they go to the outer courtyard to the mizbeach. I added the word the outer courtyard, just to tell you where the mizbeach is located, or where they come to the mizbeach to serve bakodesh and holiness. And then the words l'shares, to serve and to offer up, and offering to Hashem, would also be going on the first part of the pasuk when they come to the Oyel Moed, which Rashi now has to explain. But it could have, the pasuk could have written it more simply. So the fact that the pasuk doesn't, it divides it into two components, Rashi is therefore proves that there is a difference between the obligation of washing hands and feet when they go into the Oyel Moed, and the washing hands and feet when they come to the Mizbeach. Here we see something that Rebbe reveals something in Rashi that the Chayre was till now unrevealed. Rashi is telling us that the washing when they come to the Mizbeach to serve, that's a din about the way a person has to come close to the Mizbeach. The purpose of coming close to the Mizbeach is to do the service of the Mizbeach. So the Pasuk is telling us that any time when a person comes to the Mizbeach to do a service, there is a separate obligation of washing your hands. For example, in Hara 26, the Rebbe says every time, it says in Vayikra, that every time Hashem spoke to Moshe, first there was Vayikra, a calling out in love to Moshe, and then the beginning of in other words, an introductory calling out with endearment to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then the beginning of the instruction of Vaydaber Hashem. Here too, in a sense, every time Aveda is done on the Mizbeach, it comes with it an obligation to wash your hands and feet, which is not the case when we talk about Bevayim al Moed when they come to the El Moed. There is a din. That's a din about going into the El Moed. Yes, indeed, going into the El Moed is about serving. The end result is serving in there. But the obligation of washing is an obligation on the entry point. And here, it's not mentioned, the service, because it's not that the washing is attached to a particular service. It's about gaining entry to the Oyel Moed. You need to be a gevashana. You need to have your hands and feet washed. In other words, in a bit of another angle, says the Rebbe, the obligation of washing hands and feet in going to the Oyel Moed is not a detail, a din, a halacha, in the service of the Oyel Moed, that each avodah requires a separate hand washing. It's a din in the going into the Oyel Moed. If I may borrow an example from something perhaps very unusual, connect to the holy place, but I think many of us have had experience with some form of amusement park. So there's two kinds of payments when you go to a park like that. There's some that you have an entry ticket and go as many rides as you want on any rides you want, and there's some that after you gain entry, you need, every ride has its particular ticket. You need tickets for each ride, and the Rebbe is making a distinction here. I mean, that perhaps that's why there's amusement parks with different systems, so we can understand it. That the coming into the Oyhel Moyed, when you come into the external courtyard where the Mizbeach is, each Avodah requires the requirement of the service, l'shares, is your hands need to be washed and hands and feet need to be washed. It's something that's a requirement for each Avodah. Going into the next level, the inner sanctum, the Oyel Moed, the tent of meeting, there, the entry requirement is, so that's the holy space, you need to have hands washed, hands and feet washed. but it's not a requirement attached to each Aveda. Once you got in there, that would mean you could do other Avedas. So let's see how the Rebbe specifies this. Hey, the reason for the difference between, for the other aspect we pointed out, the wearing of the clothes of the Kohuna were there, it's the same obligation, both for coming into the Oyhel Moed, to the inner tent, or coming to Mizbech to the outer tent. And there's a difference between that, we're saying, and the obligation to wash, which by the obligation to wash hands and feet, we're saying there's two separate, distinct forms of instruction. One is on each Avodah in the outer courtyard. One is just for gaining entry. In the Oyel Moed, why is there a difference between the clothing and the washing? So we can understand that simply. When we're talking about the big day kohuna, the clothes of the kohen, that is a direct instruction about the avodah, about the actual service. The avodah needs to be done with a kohen that's dressed in his holy clothing and his vestments. And that's why you can't make a distinction in between going into the Oyel Moed, the inner tent, or the Mizbeach, because by both of them, the same obligation is there. You need the kohen needs to be wearing his kahuna clothes when he does the avodah to serve. However, because in both cases it emanates from the fact, what am I doing? When I'm doing Hashem's work, I need to be wearing, kohen needs to be wearing his clothes. That work can be in the chutzner, or it could be in the El Moed, which is not the case when we talk about washing hands and feet. That's just an introduction to the avodah. The clothing are worn of Shas Aveda. Okay. The washing hands feet is an introduction to the Aveda. It's a preparation to the Aveda. You have to make yourself whole. You have to cleanse yourself before you start to do the Aveda. That's why there can be, and there is in them a difference. You come to the Ayel Mayed, which is a closed space only for Koyanim, and we only come in there for a limited amount of time. And the moment you finish what you have to do, you got out of the oil mayed. So it's enough the one washing. When you go in there, it's enough one time to wash, even to do several avodas, several things in that space. However, when you came close to the mizbeach to serve, which the mizbeach is in the courtyard of the mishkan, there are also Leviim and Yisraelim, not just Kohanim. The oil mayed, only Kohanim can go. That's the inner Heichal, that's the inner sanctuary. But here in the outer courtyard, the Yisraelim and the Levim, they're there. By the way, Yisraelim have to come and lean on the carbon, for example. So they're coming and bringing their korbanos. In other words, showing their ownership on the carbon, leaning on the carbon in certain instances. There for every avodah, for every service, you need a separate washing. If I may borrow an example from something we've all become familiar with over the last few years, which is the concept of germs. So there's in the operating theater, and I'm not speaking with medical knowledge, I think, even if it's not true by actual doctors, but I think we can relate to the concept. In the surgical theater, where everything is super sterile, so then between 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 instruments, there's less danger of, or shall we say, the staff in there doesn't have to scrub down, sterilize, and disinfect every 5 minutes or every hour or every whatever it is. So long as they're in that pristine, sterile, disinfected environment, they can do whatever they have to do. When you're talking in an outside ward, there needs to be a lot more care taken between patients or between things to again sterilize and disinfect, because in that outside environment there's more bacteria, there's more microbes, there's more viruses, or whatever it is. When in the contained confine of an operating theater, of a surgical theater, there everything's much more sterile. So on the one hand, to get in there, of course you have to disinfect more intensely, but once you're in there, it's freer. So here's, in a way, the Rebbe is saying that this Rashi gives us a big chiddush. Coming into the Elmai, the holier space, the entry requires being washed. Once one is in there, you could do various avodas. Whereas in the Mizbeach, because it's a less, so to speak, sterile environment, it's not just the Kohanim in there. When you went for a particular Avodah, you did that Avodah, and then if you were going to do another service, one would have to have a separate hand wash, hand and foot wash. Vav, according to this is understood the Lashon of Rashi, when they come to the Oyel Moed to offer up the Keteris morning and evening and afternoon, Rashi is meaning to say what he says in his simple language without learning anything deeper than that he's trying to forewarn something. Rashi is simply telling you what he's saying. He means what he says, that the obligation of washing the hands is twice a day, because there's twice a day when the Kohanim must go into the Oyel Moed, to the inner sanctuary. When is it? To offer up the Keteris, morning and afternoon. And simply speaking, this is a simple thing. The reason is simple, says the Rabbi. After you finish the Avodah in the Oyel Moed in the morning, the Torah is talking about the reality of what takes place in a usual scenario. Finished what you had to do there in the morning, the Kohen would go out of the Oyel Moed. And then, therefore, he wouldn't be there till the afternoon Avodah. He would have to go back in for the afternoon service, the second entry, to do what he has to do there in the afternoon. Especially if, as we said earlier, you're not just allowed to hang out or come in for no reason to the El Mayed. So obviously the Kohen would have had to leave and then come back in again. So then if we're saying that Rashi's learning this pasuk, that the Torah is telling us that to go into the El Mayed, it's an obligation about going in. Says, why does Rashi even say? And Rashi is trying to tell us, for example, when do the people go? When do the Kohanim go in? Morning and afternoon for Keteris. Why does Rashi choose Keteris? Because according to Rashi, the first Aveda that they did in the day in the El Moed, and therefore that's the first entry for which washing is required, is going in for the Keteris, as we're going to explain in chapter 7. And that's why after you wash your hands for going in to bring up the Keteris, then there doesn't need to be a separate washing for the other regular Avedas that are taken place afterwards in the Oyel Moed, because you don't go in a separate time. So you're going in for the Keteris, already takes place, whatever else you're going to do after that. Of course, says the Rebbe, if a second Kohen goes in, let's say they divide the service, and one does Keteris and one does some of the other things there, then of course he's going to need a separate wash, because he's now entering into the Oyel Moed for the first time. However, if the same Kohen is doing several things, the entry to the Oyel Moed is a one-time wash. Rashi, however, wants to bring out the chiddush of the pasuk, that the obligation to wash is an obligation on the entry and not on the particulars of the service. That's why after the Kohen washes, when he comes in to offer the Keteris, he doesn't require any other washing. That's why Rashi emphasizes. To go in morning and afternoon for the Keteris, he doesn't say it has to do with the service of the Keteris. That's not what he's talking about. He's not saying that you're only obligated, like the other Mefarshim were saying, you're only obligated when you go in to do a service of Keteris. He's saying you're obligated to wash your hands whenever you go in. When do you go in practically? At least twice a day for the Keteris and other things. He's telling you the time of going to the El Mayed. Practically, when does that take place? In a practical way, there's a daily ritual pegged, carved in there every day into the El Mayed to go in twice a day for the Keteris. And by the way, the Rebbe says that that if Rashi is just giving us an example, actually the Rebbe in Ha'ara 30 says, which would mean to say that possibly Rashi is of the opinion that even if you go in, we said if you go in for no reason or to bow or whatever it is, you would also be obligated. It's a instruction and violation going in to the Oyel Moed whenever you go in. If now the Rebbe explained that to bring up Keteris is not qualifying that when are you in violation, when you go in to do an Avodah, but not if you don't go in to do it. No, the Rebbe is saying that about bringing the Keteris is actually telling us that's just practically, says Rashi, when there was a regular Seder to go in. And the Rebbe also points out in Orah 29, by the way, this may also explain why Rashi uses a bit of an unusual lashon, which is lahaktir shachas, to offer up morning and afternoon the Keteris. Should have really said to offer the Keteris morning and afternoon. it's kind of an awkward language to offer up morning and afternoon the ketores. Um, the joke. They say that some of the yeshiva bachim they don't speak such good English. They say, "Throw me out the towel and window. Throw me out the window a towel. Throw me out the window a towel. Throw me a towel out of the window. Throw me out the window a towel." It seems awkward to offer up morning and afternoon potatoes. It should be to offer potatoes morning and afternoon. So the Rebbe says, but we've just explained that the main thing Rashi is explaining here is not about the offering of potatoes. Rashi is trying to tell us the times that one would go in. It's about washing your hands when you go into the Ohel Moed. What are the times of going to the Ohel Moed? So the Rashi jumps straight into the times to offer up morning and afternoon the ketores. It's about the morning and afternoon that Rashi is telling us practically when is the entry to the Ohel Moed, morning and afternoon. But the Rebbe says that requires a little bit of iyun tzarich tzas because then the language could have still been yet even different. It could have said, if it's just about the timing, it could have said morning and afternoon to offer the ketores, not to offer morning and afternoon the ketores. Okay, but you can see how nuanced Rashi is and how detailed and how exactly the Rebbe looks at the language. Akopanim, so we just said now that when Rashi says going into the Elmed always requires a wash. When did they go in? And only for the going in, not for each Avodah. When did they go in? For the Ketores. Now we'll also understand why Rashi then adds something else. Right? It doesn't just stay with the Ketores. It says, or to sprinkle the bloods that need to be sprinkled inside there. Because those Avodas take place inside, they're not part of the ongoing daily ritual. In other words, Rashi's telling us there's two kinds of ways that going into the Ohel Moed would have been an ongoing thing. There's one way, the daily, every day going in for the Ketores, and whatever took place in the Ohel Moed after the Ketores, but as part of the medley, so to speak, of the Ketores entering, as we're soon going to say, Ketores, and then the Menorah, but as we're going to say in the next days. But the going in, first thing was for Ketores. And then there's another form of going in, when it's to do something special, but it required a separate going in, so it required a separate hand wash. Zayin. Now, from the wondrous things which we find in this Rashi, we can see in the way of halacha, when we talk about the avodah of Aaron, about lighting the menorah, about what does he do there with the neiros menorah? The pasuk says in the end of the tzavit, two expressions. It says in the morning, it says, when he makes good the candles. And about the afternoon, it says, when he brings up the candles. What does that mean? So we know there's a machlekes of Rashi and Rambam. Rashi and Rambam have an argument about what does it mean, hatovas aneres, to, so to speak, make good the candles. The Rambam means that when it says hatova, it means hadlokas aneres yatavasam, the kindling of the lights. That's their, so to speak, making good. According to Rambam's opinion, it says boiker. In the morning, there was behetiva isaneres. There needed to be a making good of the neiros. That meant lighting them. According to the Rambam, in the morning, there was a twice daily obligation to light the menorah, in the morning and in the afternoon. Rashi is, however, of the opinion that the expression behetivai, when it says when he makes good the candles in the morning, it's a lashon nikui. It's an expression for cleansing. The cups of the menorah, midesh and apsilish, from the ash of the wicks that were burnt during the night. And Rashi, is of the opinion that the kindling of the menorah was once a day in the afternoon. So now we can understand that Rashi, in his choice of language of going into the Ohel Moed for the Ketores, there's a diuk here. Rashi is going in his way. According to the derech of the pshat, it makes sense to say that the main avodah regarding the menorah is the kindling of the thing, the cleansing of the containers, of the cups of the menorah, of the parts that hold the oil, and cleansing of the ash, is just a preparation for lighting the menorah. You're preparing the candles to be able to be lit. When is the main thing taking place? In the afternoon, when you light the menorah. As we also see simply from the psukim that speak about it, that the concept of bringing up the lights, now as kindling lights, says many times, a few times in the Torah. Whereas this concept of hatovas haneres, making good the neres, it's only mentioned one time, and B, not in the psukim that speak about the menorah. It's spoken about just incidentally in the parsha that speaks about the Ketores Mizbeach, about the altar of the incense. And when it says about the time that you bring up the Haktoras, when you bring up the Ketores, it says, Baboika, in the morning, when he goes in to make the candles good, that's when the Ketores should be brought. So it's incidental. According to Pshat, the main thing clearly about the menorah is the kindling. And that's why Rashi says going into the oil mayad daily was in order to bring up the Ketores, because the Ketores is, according to Rashi, the main avodah that took place in the morning. Going in the morning was mainly before the Ketores, and not to prepare the candles. First of all, that wasn't an avodah in and of its own. And it's only a preparation, introduction to what's going to take place in the afternoon. So obviously that wouldn't happen first. First thing, going in, Rashi's telling us practically, why is he going into the oil mayad every morning? When is the going into the oil mayad? In a daily basis that requires washing for the avodah of Ketores. It's not telling us that Ketores requires washing. It's telling us practically, when is he going into the oil mayad on a regular basis? So obviously he's going in for Ketores. That's the time he goes in. And in the morning, he says, he goes in, in order to offer up Ketores. And that's why he also uses the word aktoras akteres, and in the afternoon, he doesn't speak about the going into the mizbeh, into the oil moed to light the candles, to indicate what kind that the going in would be about the candles, because even in the afternoon, because the lighting of the candles and the ketores were done the same time in conjunction with each other, right? It says bahalis Aaron Sanedis bin Arbaim Yaktereno. When Aaron would light the candles in the afternoon, that's when he would bring up the ketores. So we could say, says the Rebbe Ches, that the fact that Rashi says to offer up morning and afternoon ketores, why are we saying that going in the afternoon is also for the ketores? The afternoon also had the kindling of the menorah, because Rashi assumes that the pirush of the psukim, which say that when you make good the neiros, that's when you have to bring the ketores, and the pasuk says when you bring up the lights in the afternoon, that's when you have to bring the ketores. So it's not just that the offering ketores. It doesn't mean that the offering ketores comes after making good and after bringing up, after kindling the lights. But the pasuk is just telling us that the offering of the ketores has to be in the same time as the cleansing and offering up of the menorah in their respective morning and afternoon times. But the haktorah, the offering up the ketores, does come earlier, and that's the first avodah, both in the morning and in the afternoon. At least in Pshutei Shel Mikra, the Rebbe has several ha'aras which speak about the Gemara's discussion about when that actually took place. But Pshutei Shel Mikra, he went in for ketores, and then what took place in the night took place after that. And the imperative for that is what Rashi says. Rashi continues. Since, in other words, the imperative for that is the shita of Rashi that we said. Since when we say hat tovasan is making good the candles, means A, only cleansing. B, this cleansing is only really a preparation and an introduction to the subsequent lighting in the afternoon of the menorah. So we have to simply say, that first, Aaron, when he went in, first he made a beeline. He headed to the main avodah, which is the ketores, in the morning for sure, because the menorah avodah in the morning was just a preparation step for the afternoon. So he went to what had innate was a major avodah, which is ketores, and only then would he go and do something secondary to prepare the candles for the afternoon lighting of the menorah. But from this, that the pasuk says them both together, the behitives haneres, bahalisan haneres, which means this tells us that the same way in the morning it was done ketores and then preparing menorah, also in the afternoon ketores and then lighting the menorah. In Pshutei Shel Mikra, that's the way it would be. So that's why Rashi goes when he says every time you went into the oil mayad that we required a hand wash. When's the regular times and there's two times when the oil mayad was entered into. One is the ketores and the whole subsequent whatever took place there, which is of course the menorah also. But no need to speak separately about the menorah, because Rashi is not saying that for every service you need to wash. For going in, you need to wash. Okay, you went in for the ketores and Mamela. Same Kohen already did the Menorah. Or if you went in for some other reason, an unusual reason or a non-kavur reason, for the if there was a sin that needed to be atoned for by the Kohen Mashiach or idolatry. Okay, so we've explained the Rashi Kafter Vaferach in a beautiful way. Now comes the Rebbe and says, test 9, when we talk about the wine of Torah in this Rashi, what we can learn from the depth, the more esoteric level, washing your hands and feet, what does it mean? It means before, the concept is before a Yid starts to do his Aveda in the holy space, the Beis Hamikdash, first he has to wash his hands. You have to wash yourself and cleanse yourself from things that are built to swim that are not appropriate, from things that are not positive. When it comes to cleansing oneself before going and doing a holy thing, there's a difference between the washing that takes place before you do an Aveda on the outside Mizbeach, and the washing that takes place when you go into the internal, the tent of meeting, into the inner sanctum, like to bring Titus on the inside Mizbeach. What's the difference between the outside Mizbeach and the inside Mizbeach? The outside Mizbeach is for animals, bringing karbonis. This is the concept of refinement. You take an animal and you refine him and you elevate him to kedusha, to holiness, which is not the case in the inner Mizbeach. There was no animal sacrifices there. That was for the ketores. You took herbs, you took spices, which their concept is, which is much more refined. So the Mizbeach HaPnimi is not about refinements, it's about ketores. Ketores means also to connect, to be tied up. With the expression, B'chad ketiris katarnam, with one bind, with one kesher, with one tie, I'm tied up with Hashem. In other words, offering up ketores is about ascending in the depth of the subtlety and deeper level of connection to Hashem. It's not about the refinement of the more coarse aspects, which is represented by offering up of animals. And that's why these two madregas, mizbeach, achitz, and the outside mizbeach and the inside mizbeach, when we talk about it in the person, the outside mizbeach is the level called chitzonius, like the external aspect of the heart. And over there, it's possible, and there needs to be, the aved of birum, refinements. In other words, the external level of the hearts, which may be pulled in different directions, not just to Hashem. We need to refine that. We need to elevate that. We need to deal with some of the coarsities of that, the coarseness of it, which is not the case when we talk about the inner mizbeach in the heart. That's the inside part of the heart. There, we don't have to talk about refinements. There, the neshama is connected to Hashem. There's no wavering about the connection to Hashem. But there, we can talk about getting deeper and deeper bound up with Hashem. And that's why when one is holding by the aved of the external of the heart, where there's a connection to things of the world, and therefore there's possibility of engaging in negativity. So then there needs to be a constant awareness and protection. And every time you go to do the Avodah Mizbeach, again, you need the preparation of cleansing, of washing, of preparing for that Avodah, because you've been in a space where there's perhaps microbes and viruses and negativity. Go wash up again and then do the holy service of the Mizbeach. But when a Yid is already in the inner sanctum of his heart, the Pnimis Alev, he's already higher the matters of the world. And for him, it's enough one-time washing before he enters the space of the Aved, and then he's not coming into contact with anything that would sully that. However, here we add as well, when it comes to offering, to sprinkling the blood of the Kohen HaMashiach or the he-goats of idolatry, you need a separate washing. Why? Because when we're talking about Ketores is about the pristine tie and bond with Hashem. It's enough one washing. And then keep on ascending in holiness. However, we're talking about a kapara, we're talking about atoning for something that's negative. Then you need again to wash yourself off. What does it mean to atone? Because taka, it could be that the atonement is taking place in the inner sanctum, and that's a place that's separate from world and from negativity. However, when we're talking about washing off something negative, you need to have an extra caution that it shouldn't cause a descent from the person's level. That's why I believe maybe here it would be helpful to say what it says about tachnun. When we say tachnun, there's a bit of a danger. We're admitting to sin and asking Hashem for forgiveness, put our head down. In a sense, it's like a little bit of a descent into into negativity. Because remember, when you're recounting, asking Hashem for forgiveness, in a way you're engaging with the sin again on some level. You have to be careful to make sure to come out of that. So I think maybe this is a way to understand this. That they were saying a kapara, even though it's taking place in the holiness, but it's a kapara is trying to wash something off of negativity, and therefore there needs to be an extra caution that's placed there for germs breeding, to use that analogy. You need to wash your hands again before you go into the inner space for that. That's why the hazoya, the sprinkling from the dam, from the blood of the kohen, of what the kohen Mashiach brought up, or the soy, the he goat that was brought up for atoning avodah zarah, comes after the preparation of washing. What then afterwards becomes, what does that achieve? It achieves shalom ba'olam. These carbonates achieve peace for the world. So what are we saying is that when there's a greater descent, you have to atone for something. The fixing causes a greater ascent. So these carbonates are bringing peace to the world. They're creating something very, very, very big, which is taken. Shalom Leilem is taken from Rashi Vayikra Dalit. I'm sorry, I didn't. This part I'm not so clear about. And by this, the goats for Avodah Zarah, for atoning Avodah Zarah, which is a chatos that comes after the Oila, and therefore adds on the Oila. It's a even a higher level than the Oila. Yep. So I'm not sure about these last two paragraphs. Sorry about that.